It's Friday, the 24th of March, and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights. I'll be joined by correspondents in Edinburgh and Cardiff, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Sean Curran. On the programme this week, Boris Johnson goes to Parliament to defend his account of what went on in Downing Street during the COVID lockdown.
My belief was that we were following the rules and the guidance to the best of our ability, given the circumstances. And that was what the guidance required.
A crucial part of the government's New Deal with the European Union over Northern Ireland passes a vote with a huge majority, but not without dissent.
What I am not accepting is a situation where every business in my constituency must comply with EU rules, even if they don't sell a single widget to the European Union.
An official review says the Metropolitan Police service is institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynist.
The report underlines the fact that the Met faces a long road to recovery.
Astonishingly, there is no new action set out in her response, simply words saying that the Met must change.
The outgoing First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, gives her final address to the Scottish Parliament before her successor is chosen.
Words will never adequately convey the gratitude and the awe I hold in my heart for the opportunity I have had to serve as your First Minister.
Well, it's been a dramatic week here in Westminster, hasn't it, Sean? Peaking on Wednesday when we saw the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson answering questions in a marathon 3.5-hour session in front of a parliamentary committee, the Privileges Committee. They are investigating whether he intentionally or recklessly misled the House of Commons when he claimed that COVID lockdown rules and guidance were followed at all times when he was in charge at Number 10. And on the same afternoon, if that wasn't enough, there was a vote on key parts of the government's New Deal with the European Union over Northern Ireland. Let's start with Boris Johnson's appearance.
Yeah, as you say, a whole week's worth of parliamentary activity all in one afternoon. Boris Johnson's appearance before this committee of MPs, obviously a cross-party committee, but there was a Conservative majority on it. This was really an unprecedented moment at Westminster, to have a former Prime Minister being cross-examined about what he had said in the Commons for so long. It went on for 3 hours or so. There were some breaks so that MPs could go and vote, but it was, as you say, a marathon evidence session. And it wasn't about whether or not there should have been parties in Downing Street, because, of course, that's already been investigated by Sue Gray, the now former senior civil servant, and of course the Metropolitan Police, and we know that fines have been issued as well. So they were really focusing on what he had said to Parliament. Now, Boris Johnson at the start of the week said he had misled Parliament, but insisted that he had not done it intentionally, and so we then embarked upon this long question and answer session.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time.
The photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we were together.
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. I don't accept that people were not making an effort to distance themselves socially from each other, and that happened the whole time in Number 10. People will ask, why was this happening? Why was it necessary? It was necessary because 2 senior members of staff, the effective Chief of Staff and the Director of Communications, had both left the building or were about to leave the building in pretty acrimonious circumstances, or what were potentially acrimonious circumstances. It was important for me to be there and to give reassurance.
The pictures show that you attended a gathering in the Cabinet Room on this date to mark your birthday with at least 17 other people in attendance. Now, the attendees included your wife and your interior designer, didn't they?
They certainly included my wife and son, and yes, there was a contractor who was working in the building who popped her head round the door very briefly.
So there was your wife and your interior designer were present, and you were issued with a fixed penalty notice for this event. And you've just confirmed that at least 2 people attended who were not work colleagues. Why did you think this was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as required by the rules at the time?
But this was an event that took place, as you say, on my birthday. I'd come back from a long external visit. I thought it was reasonably necessary for work purposes because I was standing at my desk surrounded by officials who'd been asked to come and wish me a happy birthday.
Are you saying you thought these gatherings were so critical to the function of government that it was permissible to hold them even if they couldn't be socially distanced?
The short answer is yes. I thought that it was essential to thank staff for their work. I think that even though the pictures seem to show festive events, I think that our efforts, even in those pictures, are being made to do social distancing. And what I saw, what I had in my head when I was talking to the House of Commons was a memory, a strong memory of people over a long period doing everything they could to stop the spread of disease within the building. We avoided physical contact. We didn't, for instance, as the guidance says, we didn't touch each other's pens. We didn't pass stuff to each other if we could possibly avoid it. We kept. Though not every, I would not wish to say that was perfectly implemented.
Presumably, people were passing drinks to each other because we've seen the picture.
Of course, and I'm not. And this is guidance. This is guidance, and I'm not going to pretend that it was enforced rigidly. But that's explicitly what the guidance provides for.
If I was asked to give undertakings that rules and guidance had been followed, and there was any doubt about it, there was the most thinnest scintilla of doubt about it, well, you'd want to copper plate your assurances by showing that you'd taken proper advice.
Perhaps
and I put it to you, Mr. Johnson, you did not take proper advice.
This is complete nonsense. I mean, complete nonsense. I asked the relevant people. They were senior people. They'd been working very hard. They gave Jack Doyle gave me a clear account of what had happened.
The Cabinet Secretary.
How the Cabinet Secretary wasn't there? Sorry, you're wrong, because I did ask the Cabinet Secretary. And I did ask the Cabinet Secretary to conduct an inquiry on the 7th of December.
Not about whether your undertakings to the House of Commons were correct.
But of course that was what he was...
We can move on.
Oh, slightly testy exchanges there. Now, the proceedings of the committee were interrupted a couple of times, weren't they, for a vote, importantly, on parts of the New Deal we discussed earlier with the EU on Northern Ireland. What happened there? Everyone just left?
Yes, basically. Not every single member of the committee took part in the vote, but some of them did. And the way that these things go is when the division bell rings, you hear the bell in the committee room, and the person chairing normally says, right, OK, we're going to pause and we'll all come back at a certain point when everybody's had the chance to vote. So, of course, the big vote was on what is known as the Stormont break, which is part of Rishi Sunak's new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Now, there's a slightly complicated parliamentary procedure where instead of there being a brand new Act of Parliament, this was going to be debated in just 90 minutes and MPs were going to be asked to approve what's known as secondary legislation. Now, the Stormont break, which allows members of the Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland to have a say on new EU rules, and it gives them a chance to express their displeasure at potential new rules, that is only part of the deal. But controversially, the government had said that they were going to take this vote as being the equivalent of a vote on the deal. So once this was out of the way, Parliament will have had its say. Now, it's controversial because there are some Conservative MPs and, of course, members of the largest unionist party in Northern Ireland, the DUP, who were unhappy not just with the deal, but particularly with these proposals as they relate to Northern Ireland.
We all believe, as Democrats here, people should have a say over any change to the laws under which they live. But under the old protocol, that was not the case. The Stormont break not only ends that, but ensures that changes to rules and regulations have the consent of both communities, asserting a fundamental principle of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
He has described the break on multiple occasions, including in BBC interviews, as a veto. Given that if Stormont pulls it, UK ministers may still not exercise the break in exceptional circumstances, so it's down to ministerial fiat. And also given that even if they do, the EU can object and it's referred to independent arbitration where the UK could lose, that is a route to arbitration, isn't it? That is not a veto.
One, it is a veto. Two, it is a route to arbitration. And three, it removes any element of the ECJ being relevant in this decision. So I think we've actually delivered on some of the things that the Honourable Gentleman and I have campaigned on over the years.
This Windsor Agreement enables a huge opportunity in Northern Ireland, not just to be a precious part of our United Kingdom, but also to be the target of enormous amounts of foreign direct investment coming into Northern Ireland, because it will have the advantage of being an integral part of the United Kingdom, but having open access to EU markets as well.
Whereas the government has once again been distracted by rebellion and infighting within their own party, thanks to the Labour Party, they can be sure that the national interests will be served today. While this deal is not perfect, it is an improvement. So, the interests of Northern Ireland and the rest of our country, we will be voting for it today.
Whilst undoubtedly improvements have been made, we have not yet fully addressed this fundamental problem, which is the continued application of EU law for the manufacturing of all goods in Northern Ireland. I am not saying that where Northern Ireland businesses trade with the EU standards and rules should not apply. I'm saying we can allow for that. But what I am not accepting is a situation where every business in my constituency must comply with EU rules, even if they don't sell a single widget to the European Union.
We know, we understand when the negotiation is done and a decision has to be made. And in every single negotiation, in every single agreement there have been parts of those agreements that we haven't liked, but we've had to stomach it for the greater good of the people of Northern Ireland. We see the unionist concerns. We see many of them, most of them addressed in this agreement, and we are prepared to make the decision on that basis. But let me make this very clear to this House. If the DUP still refuse to go into government after all of this, more and more people, I can guarantee you, will figure out that the best way to make the north of Ireland work is within a new Ireland.
The truth is, this is not a Stormont break, it's a Stormont fake. It should be rejected by this House. It doesn't protect the Union, it doesn't protect democracy in Northern Ireland, and it will not get the Assembly back and running again.
Thank you very much, Sean. Back to you shortly. Let's go to Edinburgh now and our Scotland political reporter, Jenny Davidson. Hello to you, Jenny. The very serious and sad subject of forced adoptions came up this week, didn't it? The cases of unmarried women who were shamed or coerced into giving up their babies in the 50s, 60s and 70s. What's been the latest development?
Yes, well, on Wednesday, Nicola Sturgeon made a formal apology to those thousands of women who were forced to give up their children for adoption against their will between the 1950s and 1970s. It's estimated around 60,000 women in Scotland were affected. Now, some other countries, such as Ireland and Australia, had already made such apologies, and there'd been an ongoing campaign in Scotland by those affected for that apology. It had been taken up by MSPs, in particular Scottish Labour's Monica Lennon. And last year, a cross-party group of MSPs had written to the First Minister asking her to make such an apology. And as one of her last acts as First Minister, she made that apology on behalf of the nation this week.
As a government and a parliament, we can set the record straight. We can acknowledge the terrible wrongs that were done, and we can say with one voice that we are sorry. So today, as First Minister, on behalf of the Scottish Government, I say directly to the mothers who had their babies taken away from them, to the sons and the daughters who were separated from their parents, to the fathers who were denied their rights, and to the families who have lived with the legacy. For the decades of pain that you have suffered, I offer today a sincere, heartfelt and unreserved apology. We are sorry. No words can ever make up for what has happened to you, but I hope this apology will bring you some measure of solace. It is the very least that you deserve, and it is long overdue.
Although a national apology cannot right the wrongs of the past, but for those suffering lifelong trauma, it will be the start of a healing process. My only regret is that many campaigners have sadly died before this apology was made. We need to make sure that this part of history will never repeat itself and that we protect the rights of women and children in Scotland.
Well, quite an emotional plea there from Nicola Sturgeon, an apology. It was also, as you say, one of her final acts because it was also the final session of First Minister's questions this week. Presumably quite a big moment, or was it business as usual right up to the end?
Well, it was quite a fiery First Minister's questions this week. I mean, firstly, between Douglas Ross and Nicola Sturgeon over that controversy over the last week about SNP membership numbers, the presiding officer having to rebuke Douglas Ross on a number of occasions about his use of language. It then continued with both the Conservatives, Douglas Ross, and Labour's Anas Sarwar attacking Nicola Sturgeon's record in government, going through lists of what they feel are her failings. Nicola Sturgeon coming back and mentioning what she feels are her achievements as First Minister, mentioning things like the Scottish child payment and the baby box. But certainly anything but a sort of nice softball First Minister's questions for her last one before she stands down. So let's get a bit of a flavour of that exchange between Nicola Sturgeon and Douglas Ross.
On Nicola Sturgeon's watch, Scotland's schools have plummeted down international league tables. She has made no progress on the attainment gap and broke her promise to close it completely. The Named Persons Act, the Hate Crime Act, the Gender Recognition Bill were all unworkable. Drug deaths in Scotland are the highest in Europe, 5 times greater than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. And right now, at this moment, 1 in 7 Scots is on an NHS waiting list. And on her final day in this chamber as First Minister, a cross-party committee of this Parliament delivered a damning report on ferries. They found that Nicola Sturgeon personally intervened to prioritise vanity over vessels, leading to huge delays and costing the taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds. On these and so many other issues, Nicola Sturgeon ignores Scotland's priorities in favour of her obsession with independence. She divided our country and failed on every mission she set herself. First Minister, isn't that the truth of your legacy?
Progressive income tax, the Scottish child payment, lifting children out of poverty, the baby box, closing the attainment gap, record numbers of people from backgrounds like mine going to university, a national investment bank leading the way in climate change, abolishing prescription charges, minimum unit pricing, saving lives, record high health funding, the best performing accident emergency departments anywhere in the UK, the Domestic Abuse Act, free period products, expanded, doubled childcare, the promise for care experienced young people, the highest level of school spend per pupil anywhere in the UK, the highest number of teachers per head, 8% more teachers now than when I became First Minister, free tuition for higher education, free bus travel for those under 22. I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to, because this is my last session of First Minister's questions.
Labour's Anna Sarwar said that Nicola Sturgeon's successor would inherit her record but not her mandate, quoted back her own words about the Conservative leadership contest last year, saying it was an election was a democratic imperative. Now, we're not expecting an election, but there's certainly going to be some challenges in the inbox of Nicola Sturgeon's successor from the get-go.
Absolutely. Jenny, after First Minister's questions, Nicola Sturgeon did give a farewell statement. And as we wait to find out who her successor will be, what was her parting message?
Well, this was a much more personally reflective statement. At times she was quite visibly emotional. She said that whatever she did in the future, nothing would come close to her 3,046 days as First Minister. She said it had been a profound honour, and she acknowledged that it was 3 years on from the first lockdown and said that the COVID would in many ways define her time as First Minister, describing the role as challenging, exhilarating and exhausting, but a privilege. And she also thanked all those who'd supported her, her staff, her civil servants and her Deputy First Minister John Swinney, who's also standing down.
To my colleagues across this chamber, robust debate and holding government to account are the hallmarks of what we do in here. That is as it should be, and let me thank those in other parties for that. But maybe, just maybe, we might actually enhance our democracy if occasionally we, all of us, treated each other with kindness too, if we remembered that we are opponents, not enemies. And to my successor, next week we will find out whose portrait will go alongside mine on the stairwell of Bute House. Subject to this chamber's approval, it will either be Scotland's second female First Minister or the first from a minority ethnic background. Either way, that will send the very powerful message that this, the highest office in the land, is one that any young person in Scotland can aspire to. Never forget that every day in this office is an opportunity to make something better for someone somewhere in Scotland. Do not shy away from the big challenges or difficult debates. You won't get everything right, but it is always better to aim high and fall short than not try at all. And always draw strength, energy and wisdom from the people of this wonderful country. And it is now to the people of Scotland, all of you, whether you voted for me or not, that I reserve my final words from this seat. Thank you so much for placing your trust in me. Words will never adequately convey the gratitude and the awe I hold in my heart for the opportunity I have had to serve as your First Minister. It truly has been the privilege of my lifetime. And with these words, Presiding Officer, I draw it to a close.
Some words there from Nicola Sturgeon to her successor, and of course on Monday we're going to find out who that successor will be.
Jenny Davidson, thank you very much. Sean, an official review of the country's biggest police force, the Metropolitan Police Force, was published this week. It was written by a member of the House of Lords, Baroness Louise Casey. It was pretty damning, wasn't it?
This is a scathing report, and Louise Casey found that there were a whole bunch of institutionalised problems. So she said that the Met was institutionally racist, it was institutionally misogynist, and it was institutionally homophobic. And she said that it was failing in its duty towards women and girls. This, of course, comes in the wake of the murder of Sarah Everard, and that was the trigger for commissioning this report. And she, of course, was murdered by a serving Metropolitan Police officer. It's not the first time that these kind of criticisms have been levelled at the Metropolitan Police. in the wake of the murder of the black teenager Stephen Lawrence. There was the Macpherson report in 1999, and that was the report that said and accused the Met of being institutionally racist. And Louise Casey is basically saying in this report that not enough has changed and not much has changed. So it was a pretty grim day for the Met, and it was an issue that obviously MPs wanted to talk about and they wanted to question the Home Secretary about. They'd already heard earlier in the day through media interviews from the Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, the new Met Commissioner. Now, he'd accepted that it was a damning report, but he had rejected that word institutional or institutionalised because he said it was something that had been politicised, and he said it was ambiguous. So MPs wanted to know how far the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, would go in accepting the report's findings.
The report underlines the fact that the Met faces a long road to recovery. Improvements must be made as swiftly as possible, but some of the huge challenges for the organisation may take years to fully address. It is vital that the law-abiding public do not face a threat from the police themselves. Those who are not fit to wear the uniform must be prevented from doing so, and where they are revealed, they must be driven out of the force and face justice. I ask Londoners to judge Sir Mark and the Mayor of London not on their words, but on their actions to stamp out racist, misogynistic and homophobic behaviour.
The report published today by Louise Casey, commissioned by the Mayor of London into standards and culture in the Metropolitan Police Service, is thorough, forensic and truly damning. It finds the Met is failing women and children, that predatory and unacceptable behaviour have been allowed to flourish, and it finds institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia. We support the work the new Met Commissioner is doing now to start turning the Met around. He and his team must now go much further in response to the Casey review. But I'm concerned that the Home Secretary's statement is dangerously complacent. Exactly. Astonishingly, there is no new action set out in her response, simply words saying that the Met must change. This is a continuation of the hands-off Home Office response that Baroness Casey criticises in her report. Where is her plan now to turn that around? Where is the Home Office plan in response to this? On standards, on neighbourhood policing, on violence against women and girls, and on systemic or institutional discrimination. Where are those plans?
Why is the Home Secretary not taking any responsibilities in her role in the Met? If she doesn't want the responsibility, then for goodness sake, just stand down.
Home Secretary.
Well, I'm afraid I think the Honourable Lady needs to direct some of her criticism at the person who's directly responsible for the performance of the Met, and that is, unfortunately, her Labour colleague in London, the Mayor.
Does the Home Secretary not agree with me? It would be more effective to abolish the Metropolitan Police Service, transfer the specialist operations to the remit of the Home Office, and establish a police service for London to focus solely on the maintenance of law and order.
Home Secretary.
With respect, I don't agree that we must abolish the Metropolitan Police Service. I think that we need to institute a wide-ranging and profound programme of reform.
I represent a constituency in Lambeth where trust in policing is at the lowest level anywhere in London. And instead of addressing abuses of existing police power, the government seems to be creating new unaccountable ones. This report is not the first to highlight institutional racism, sexism and homophobia, but it seems that the Home Secretary is unwilling to accept that.
If she's serious about tackling violence against women and girls, it simply isn't adequate to come to this dispatch box and say it will take many years to fix the problems within the Met. So can I ask her to reflect on that and see what more can be done within the Home Office to spread good cultural practice throughout our police services? Because I can say that these issues are not just restricted to the Met.
That report, Sean, the Casey review into the Metropolitan Police, also featured in Prime Minister's questions. What did Sir Keir Starmer ask?
Yes, well, this was an interesting political moment because traditionally issues like crime and policing have been seen as being the preserve of the Conservatives, and Certainly Conservative politicians have liked to portray themselves as being the natural party for people who are concerned about those issues. But Sir Keir Starmer this week devoted all 6 of his questions to the whole question about policing. He mentioned the Casey review, but he also accused the Conservatives of wrecking policing.
On his watch, rape charges are 1.6%. Yet the government still hasn't backed Labour's plan to have proper, high-quality rape and serious sexual offences units in every police force. Why not?
What Louise Casey also says is that primary public accountability of the Met sits with the Mayor of London. She described that relationship between the Mayor and the Met as, in her words, dysfunctional. But when it comes... So I hope when he stands up, he will also confirm to the House that he will take up these matters with the Labour Mayor of London so that he plays his part. But Mr. Speaker, the way rape victims were treated by the criminal justice system wasn't good enough, and that's why the government published an ambitious rape review action plan.
Can the Prime Minister tell us what's the charge rate for theft and burglary across the country?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, actually, since 2019, neighbourhood crime is down by 25%.
The Prime Minister stands there and pretends that everything's fine. He is so totally out of touch. He needs to get out of Westminster, get out of Kensington, and I don't mean to Malibu, to the streets of Britain. Go there and tell people it's all fine and see what reaction he gets. The answer he didn't want to give, although he knows it, is 4% of cases, 4% of burglary charges are charged. 96% of theft and burglary cases not even going before the courts. Burglars twice as likely to get away with it now as they were a decade ago. They should be ashamed of that record. So rather than boasting and blaming others, why doesn't he tell the country when he's going to get the theft and burglary charge rate back to where it was before they wrecked policing?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me say North Yorkshire's a lot further away than North London. Since the Conservatives came into power, crime is down 50%, Mr. Speaker. Violent crime down 40%. Burglary, the Honourable Gentleman mentioned burglary. Burglary down 56%. Why? Because we've recruited 20,000 more police officers. We've given them the powers to tackle crime, and we've kept serious offenders in prison for longer. All they've done is vote against greater protections for emergency workers. They've opposed tougher sentences for violent criminals, and they are failing to give the police the powers that they need. It's the same old Labour, soft on crime, soft on criminals.
The only criminal investigation he's ever been involved in is the one that found him guilty of breaking the law. After 13 years of Tory government, they've done nothing on standards, neighbourhood policing has been shattered, and burglars and rapists walk the streets with impunity. It's the same every week from the Prime Minister, whether it's the cost of living crisis, crime running out of control, or the state of the NHS. Why is his answer always to tell this British people they've never had it so good?
Right, Minister. Mr. Speaker, let me just address the issue the Honourable Gentleman raised, because I said at the time I respected the decision the police reached and I offered an unreserved apology. But for the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Speaker, at the moment that happened, there was a full investigation by a very senior civil servant. The findings of which confirmed that I had no advance knowledge about what had been planned, having arrived early for a meeting. But he doesn't need me to tell him that. He's probably spoken to the report's author much more frequently than I have.
Sean, thank you very much for now. Over to Cardiff and our Wales political correspondent, Daniel Davies, who's at the Senedd. Daniel, after the big childcare announcement for England in last week's budget, I gather the Welsh Government has faced calls to match it.
Yes, it has. The Welsh Government likes to tell us it has the most generous childcare system in the UK. There's more childcare available for a longer period of the year to a broader range of people than is the case in England, or at least that was the case until the Chancellor announced that the free childcare provision in England will come down to children aged 9 months and above. And since then, the Welsh Government has been facing questions about whether they're going to match that offer. It's not going to happen overnight in England. Nevertheless, it has given the Welsh Conservatives some ammunition to use against the Welsh Labour government. The question about childcare keeps coming up, as it did again in First Minister's questions.
What people want to know is, will there be a universal childcare offer for 1- and 2-year-olds that will capture people that do not benefit from that 30 hours of free childcare? You actually have the money coming to you to do that. A simple answer could have been, yes, we will deliver it, and people across Wales will enjoy this benefit. Time and time again, for ideological reasons, you choose not to bring best practice here to Wales.
We have already found the money. We are already making the investment. And when the leader of the opposition sloganises at me about business rate relief, just remind him of what I told him just a few moments ago. If you are running a childcare business in Wales, you have 100% rate relief through decisions made here in Wales.
Now, as well as that tax cut for childcare providers that Mr Drakeford was talking about, he said the Welsh Government was also spending money on expanding nurseries, investing in the bricks and mortar of these businesses, and there was no new money from Westminster to help with that, he said. But it should be pointed out there have been inquiries by Senedd committees highlighting that there are gaps in provision, that childcare isn't available necessarily to everyone in all parts of Wales. Some people working in that industry aren't in very necessarily secure jobs either. So you can understand why the opposition think, despite these boasts from the Welsh Government about a generous system, why the opposition think there is an issue for them to exploit here.
Indeed. Daniel, long-awaited proposals for a Welsh clean air law have been published. What are the details?
Yes, this is something Mark Drakeford promised years ago when he was running for the Welsh Labour leadership, a clean air law. We got to see in the last few days what that will look like. There's a lot in there, including targets to bring down levels of pollution in Wales. And one of the ways they could do that is by charging motorists on the M4 motorway and some other busy dual carriageways to drive heavily polluting vehicles into pollution hotspots. This bill would give ministers very broad powers to do that. Now, there has been, by and large, cross-party support for a clean air bill, but this idea of charging some drivers causing a bit of a stink with the Conservatives in the chamber.
So in light of the cost of living crisis, will you consider the disastrous idea to introduce road charges for commuters, which will further penalise people suffering from cuts to local transport services? It is important the Welsh Government does not use this bill to punish the people of Wales. With the bill set to include provisions to enable road charging, Welsh ministers must remember that every local authority in Wales has at least 30% of households facing transport poverty.
But in the end, if you drive more slowly and you turn off your car when you're stationary, you will significantly reduce your emissions. And frankly, if you fail to do that, then you will end up paying a charge for that, because that is absolutely right. We need to get people to do the right thing. But I emphasise, this is about education and making the people of Wales aware of what effect their own behaviour has on the surroundings there.
Now, the Welsh Government says it has no plans to bring in road charges, clean air charges. It says it doesn't expect it will need to, because it's hoping that 50-mile-an-hour zones on the motorway will bring down pollution. Nevertheless, if that doesn't work, then they have, under this bill, got the powers to do it. As I say, broad support for this bill. There are still some questions. For example, at what level will ministers set those targets on pollution? We're a long way off from knowing that.
Daniel, let's talk about Wales's Health Minister, Eluned Morgan, because she was forced to defend her record in the Senedd after several failures in the NHS came to light. What happened?
Yes, that's right. The Conservatives, with the support of Plaid Cymru, tabled a confidence motion in Eluned Morgan, saying in effect that Mark Drakeford should sack her because of problems like long waits for ambulances, long waits for A&E care, and in particular problems in North Wales, where Eluned Morgan recently sacked the chair of the Health Board that runs the NHS in North Wales. Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board has gone back into special measures for the second time. That's the highest level of Welsh Government intervention. But the opposition say in going out and looking for people to sack, Eluned Morgan has dodged her own responsibility and instead looking for scapegoats.
We need to know that we have a government, that we have ministers who are accountable and desire accountability. To serve in government is an honour. It's an enormous responsibility too. And no doubt it's a difficult job. But there can be no ducking of responsibility because it's a difficult job.
Every day, I ask myself if I can continue to do this thankless job. But every day I realise that I've got something to offer, and that is that I care. I want to provide the best possible health and care service for the people of Wales. I want our Welsh NHS to succeed. So it is going to be my privilege to remain as Health Minister for as long as I have the support and confidence of the First Minister. It's my duty to support the people of Wales.
So there you have it, a thankless job, but she's carrying on in it because that confidence motion failed. Whatever the opposition says, what's most important to her is the backing of Labour Senedd members. They've been uncharacteristically frank on a lot of issues recently, asking some awkward questions, but on this issue of backing Eluned Morgan, they all voted for her.
Well, she was quite defiant, there's no doubt about that. Daniel Davies in Cardiff, thank you very much. Let's go back to Sean Curran here in Westminster and talk about the Home Secretary Suella Braverman's visit or trip to Rwanda, to Kigali, where she saw some of the facilities, where she's hoping to send migrants who arrive on UK shores on those small boats. When she got back to Westminster, she was answering questions about that trip in the House of Commons.
Yes. So this was, of course, a trip to emphasise a key part of the new illegal migration bill, which contains this proposal that says that people who are deemed to have arrived in the UK illegally, by which the government is at the moment largely talking about people who've crossed the channel in small boats, will be detained and then deported, and they'll be deported to Rwanda. And obviously, the Home Secretary had enjoyed her trip, and we saw some coverage of it and comments about how much she'd enjoyed looking at some of the accommodation. It's fair to say that when she came back for her regular question and answer session in the Commons, opposition MPs were not as impressed.
For all her taxpayer-funded photo ops this weekend, the Home Secretary has seemingly failed to bung the Rwandan government enough money for them to increase the number of asylum seekers they're ready to take this year. Mr. Speaker, for a deterrent to be effective, it has to be credible. Yet these plans are just empty threats. So can she tell us where she expects to detain the tens of thousands of asylum seekers forecast to arrive this year? When will this government get out of the way so that Labour can deliver its 5-point plan to stop the boat crossings?
What's the Labour Party done? Well, the Shadow Home Secretary's been on Twitter. She's very good on Twitter. She tweeted in the last 10 days Labour's paltry excuse for a plan. Half of it's stuff we're already doing. The other half is their plan for open borders and unlimited migration. What I suggest they do is get off Twitter, get to Rwanda, and I'll show them how to stop the boats.
This bill is not about helping asylum seekers. This is about banning asylum seekers. So what does it say about the Home Secretary's morals that she believes Rwanda would be a blessing for asylum seekers, but when they come here she calls them a swarm and an invasion?
Home Secretary.
The problem that the Honourable Lady is labouring under is that she is, in her opposition to our plans, she is siding with the people smuggling gangs. She is actively encouraging, effectively, the cooperation and evil practice of exploitation of vulnerable people coming into this country. Vote for our measures to stop the people smuggling gangs and stop the boats.
Thank you very much to you, Sean. That's all for Politics UK for this week. I'll be back with Politics Live on Monday at 12:15 on BBC Two and the iPlayer. From all of us here, bye-bye.